turn off my camera. Okay, here you go.
Good.
Excellent. Thank you, Steph. Okay, so again, we're just waiting a moment to see if any of our commissioners are in the waiting room so you can promote them to panelists and we can kick off. Let's give that a moment. In the interim, I will quickly share the agenda, so hopefully this comes up, everybody. We'll use this to drive on the docks today. I see we have Commissioner Pope here. Commissioner Wallace as well. And Commissioner Navis. So, Mr. Chairman, if you like, I could perform a roll call for quorum.
That would be great.
Thank you. Commissioner Meyer?
Here.
Commissioner Racines?
Here.
Commissioner Pope?
Here.
Commissioner Naves?
Here.
Commissioner Reville?
Here.
And Commissioner Wallace?
Here. Here.
Excellent. Mr. Chairman, and Chairman Gordon.
Thank you. I'm here and please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You have a quorum. So to quickly level set, today is going to be a special and brief virtual meeting of the Commission for the specific purposes of approving the list of qualified vendors for RFQ 4, which is our RFQ around reserves management, and then looking to approve RFP 4 for reserves management, as well as RFP 6 for financial audit and attestation. And the brief agenda reflects that, and there will be no public comment today. I will, however, quickly read off my disclaimer, which is that key decisions pertaining to the Wyoming Stable Token Initiative will be made by the commissioners of the Stable Token Commission or the state legislature in public meetings such as this. At this time, no blockchain has been selected for deployment of Wyoming Stable Tokens, and no Wyoming Stable Tokens have been issued. Further, the only commissioners are those appointed by statute, the governor, or a majority vote of the commission. Information outside of these public meetings should only be considered factual and legitimate if it is distributed through our official channels. At this time, these are limited to our website at stabletoken.wyo.gov, the Wyoming legislature website at wyoledge.gov, and our social media channels with the @WyoStable username on Twitter, YouTube, GitHub, and Warpcast. And Mr. Chairman, if there's no other questions or items to address before starting here, I'm happy to get right into our RFQ 4 results memo.
Without objection, that's fine. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the first document you'll have with you is the RFQ 4 results memo. And again, to quickly level set here, when we had our meeting on December 19th, our monthly meeting, we opted to delay RFQ 4 for mostly two reasons. One was, and this is kind of the larger task here, this is an incredibly important topic for the commission to get its head around and address. We need to make sure that the firms we're working for in regards to reserves management are the best that we can possibly get, because this is going to be a very critical part of the stable tokens infrastructure right there with the actual technical components of it. So that's one. And then two is we did have several scenarios during the initial RFQ process in which several submissions came in on behalf of multiple organizations. And as a reminder, the commission certainly expects work to be performed by consortia of vendors when we get to the ultimate delivery and the proposals. But during our qualification period, we certainly wanted to qualify vendors individually to make sure everyone was qualified in their own right for a specific function before kind of bringing everyone together. And we need a little bit of time to straighten that out. So at the meeting on the 19th, the commission agreed to move the submission date for RFQ 4 from December 12th to December 27th, and that was noticed on December 20th. And we consider that a re-advertisement of the bid. Specifically, we did not change any of the content in the questionnaires associated with the request for qualifications. So with that said, we then did our re-advertisement of RFQ4, and we received a total of 59 submissions across 8 functions from 11 different vendors. And you can see the breakdown here, and then you can see the kind of equal distribution of vendors across all different functions. The next kind of big topic for us to discuss is how we treated what I'm referring to here as funds. And this really represents the scenarios we found ourselves in regards to organizations or potentially consortia of organizations that wanted to request qualification. And what this came down to was a determination that while we certainly want to qualify vendors individually per function, and for the most part, we did end up doing that, there were several specific instances where there was already a legal structure and organization of firms delivering one product. And these would be funds or trusts that already have existing stable tokens they can potentially turnkey for us with, again, the reserves management structure in that capacity. So we worked with those organizations to understand what their capabilities were, how they would provide support for the Wyoming Stable Token Initiative, figure out who's involved, get the data about them, and then qualify these funds in totality. And we'll talk more about who those are specifically in a second. But the way it would work is if a fund is going to propose, or rather, a fund is going to go for qualification in a certain function, we could qualify the fund in totality. If the organizations that compose that fund did not submit documentation for RFQs individually, then they cannot qualify for that individual RFQ. And I hope that makes sense. I'll be happy to answer any questions about that structure, but all I have to say is if a firm wanted to independently be in the mix and perhaps picked up by a different consortium for a specific function like NAV calculation, they would need to provide an RFQ for NAV calculation. Whereas if they're part of a fund and the fund submits the NAV calculation component, they're only able to provide or qualify and subsequently provide services within that fund structure. So the way that netted out was there was 2 specific funds, both token issuers, with several groups thereunder that proposed, or trying not to mix the words up here, that submitted qualifications as a fund. One of those was Superstate Short Duration U.S. Government Securities Fund, which included Superstate Asset Trust, Superstate Inc., Federated Investment Consultings, which is DBA as Federated Hermes, UMB Bank, and NAV Consulting. And the other was the BlackRock USD Institutional Digital Liquidity Fund Limited, which is BlackRock Securitized Markets as the one of the fund managers and I believe transfer agents, Securitized LLC, which provides the technology, and then Bank of New York Mellon. So those were the 2 larger fund structures that submitted requests for qualifications as one unit. And I understand there's a lot of moving parts on that, so I'll pause there before getting into the results and take any questions from the commissioners.
Yeah, Anthony, I guess if any of those entities, I guess, submitted an application, and they could end up subsequently in a different consortium and wouldn't have to reapply, I'm assuming.
So through the chair, Commissioner Meyer, actually quite the opposite is what I'm trying to get across here. So if you are a organization within a fund structure and you qualify as part of the fund where different people are doing different things, even within certain functions we're talking about, that's where qualifying. If you wanted to qualify specifically for a different function independently, we told vendors they would need to submit those RFQs individually.
Oh, so they could submit an RFP to be a custodial bank or something like that, and they could plug and play any place, but they'd have to do an individual submission.
Through the chair, Commissioner Meyer, that is correct.
Okay, all right. Is that understood? Do they know that if they basically I just decided that they wanted to stand alone, but with anybody else, they could do that, but they're essentially trying to, I guess, get the best people they know to work with, and that's their plan or somebody's plan, I guess.
So through the chair, Commissioner Meyer, that's correct. I think we only had one instance in which that did happen, but I can assure you the team was working the lines over the holidays to make sure this was well communicated amongst all the vendors that we spoke to. And we were able to get that point across, yes.
All right, okay. Thank you.
Further comments, questions? Director, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So now to get into the list of qualified vendors, and we will do this the way that we did it last time around and just go through function by function and list out who was found to be qualified based on the criteria that were put forth by the working group on procurement integrity, and we'll take it from there. So for RFQ 4.1, which is for investment management services, the qualified vendors were found to be Federated Investment Counseling, Franklin Advisors, Inc., which is Franklin Templeton, Van Eck Associates Corporation, the Northern Trust Company, and Bildel Fund Limited. For RFQ 4.2, which is reserves management, particularly around fiat custody, we found State Street Corporation, Northern Trust Company, Western Alliance Bank, and the Bildel Fund to be qualified. For RFQ 4.3, which is our reserves management for U.S. government securities custody, i.e. the treasuries and the repurchase agreements, we found the qualified vendors to be State Street Corporation, Northern Trust, and the Bildel Fund. For RFQ 4.4, which is for middle and back office services, we found State Street Corporation, Franklin Advisors, Northern Trust, Bildel Fund, and SS&C Technologies Holdings to be qualified in that regard. For RFQ 4.5, Fund Accounting and Administrative Services, we found State Street Corporation, Franklin Advisors, Van Eck Associates Corporation, the Northern Trust Company, Bildel Fund Limited, SS&C Technologies Holdings to be qualified vendors. For RFQ 4.6, which is daily NAV calculation and publication, we found the qualified vendors to be the State Street Corporation, the Northern Trust Company, Bildel Fund Limited, SS&C Technologies Holdings, Inc. For RFQ 4.7, which is attestation support, we found Franklin Advisors, Van Eck Associates, Northern Trust, Bildel Fund, SS&C Technologies Holdings, and the Network Firm LLP to be qualified. And for final one, RFQ 4.8, which is additional banking services, we found Franklin Advisors, Van Eck Associates, Northern Trust Company, SS&C Technologies Holdings, Inc., Western Alliance Bank, and the Bildel Fund Limited to be the qualified vendors. So you'll see, again, there's some repetition amongst those, and that reflects that where we had, these funds kind of proposing across all the different books of work, or just larger entities that can actually handle all of those capabilities in-house. So I've got a couple other notes for RFQ 4, but that is the meat of it. So I'll again pause for any questions that you may have.
Yeah, Anthony, which one of these, I think there was some discussion about having a conflict of interest. If you were doing one, you probably shouldn't be doing another one. And so could you draw our attention back to those ones that might be conflicted?
So through the chair, Commissioner Meyer, I want to take this question to two different directions because we had two different conversations about conflicts in the last meeting. I think it's worth rehashing both of them. The one that we had in the meeting regarding vendors being conflicted is particularly around the audit and attestation function. And if there's any CPAs on the line who could respond perhaps with more clarity than I can, I will certainly defer to them. But long story short, if you are, let's say, someone who's not on this list, we'll just to do a name drop, any of the big four, right? So KPMG, one of my former alma maters. If you are doing work on the audit side, you cannot do work. You're prevented from doing work on the advisory side or the consulting side. So if you're doing the financial audit, you would not be able to do the internal controls piece. But those conflicts are outside of the scope of RFQ4. Because we're talking about attestation support. We're not talking about necessarily the third party auditor. We're talking about teams inside an organization that can help feed information to our prospective auditor. And I hope that's a pretty straightforward answer, but I do see Commissioner Pope has his hand up as well.
Commissioner Poe.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, what we're trying to avoid in all situations is having a vendor audit itself. And that's really the simplest explanation of this. And if there are vendors that appear in both an advisory role and and on the attestation side in the other RFQ, then what we would ask is further information on whether or not they can remain unconflicted if selected for both functions, and if so, how they would do that and avoid the public perception of that. So yes, there is there aren't any concerns at this level about it, but there would be questions later should that happen.
Yeah, Anthony, is there any benefit into, I guess, having several of these companies perform as far as benefit and price or structure, or if having if some of these companies are doing multiple parts of this?
So through the chair, Commissioner Meyer, we do have some flexibility on our side, and I do believe you brought this up at the last discussion as well, in a different kind of vector, but getting back to the same point that we want to make sure we've got some flexibility when we come out of the RFP process. So the way that the RFPs work will be, we'll invite all of these, and this is where we get into these next steps here. So maybe I'll use it as a segue. So up next for us is the team. Our team will notify all of the respondents to the RFQ, whether they qualified or did not qualify as to that status. If they qualified, they will go down that path of the RFP, and we'll talk about that in a moment. If they did not qualify, again, as a reminder, they do have a ability to appeal. We have to respond back in 10 business days to that. So for example, there's a few in regards to the initial RFQs that went out, and we're working through those responses now, and the commissioners, per our rules, will all be BCC'd when those go out, so you'll have the context as well. But I want to just reiterate that for vendors that did not qualify, A, there's an appeal process, and a B, again, we are pursuing a rule set for procurement where we'll have rolling qualifications similar to how the state construction department does it as well. The other path here is for qualified vendors. We invite them into the RFP process. Steph has set up the RFP Info Center, which has been working as intended, where vendors are able to ask any questions. They are able to sign off on their memorandum of understanding and acknowledge that they have read our rules and they know how all that works, and then can actually do the Q&A and file the submission through there. To kind of come back around to your question, what our rules allow us to do is essentially cherry pick the best of the best for any given function. So even if a book of work comes in through a consortium, we feel that 2/3 of this is the best, but 1/3 in a different consortium is the best. We have the ability to kind of pull those together as we see fit. Now, the question, of course, would become, do the third-party vendors who are proposing the book of work, are they still interested if you start carving up their proposed consortia? But the way we've structured all of our rules and the RFP around consortia, I think we've got a lot of flexibility there. And I do notice that Commissioner Revel has his hand up.
Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question for Director Apollo. This is in line with a question I asked in our last meeting, which is if you could just please let us know when and how we should identify conflicts of interest for the vendors. That would be useful information. Thank you.
Through the chair, Commissioner Revel, and thank you for bringing that back up. I was hoping to come back around to it. Thank you for giving me a good segue to it. We had talked about, again, the conflicts for the vendors, again, on the audit and ad test versus the advisory side. For the internal work, I had a conversation with the Attorney General's office. I was made aware of a memo that was distributed to the commissioners probably before my tenure. We are working to revise that to make sure we've got updated dates and kind of structural edits in there. But more or less, we point to the Wyoming ethics and disclosure statute and the executive orders on ethics and disclosure from the past, and that was what was in the original memo. Those still hold. And if we need to be more tactical about things, I think we certainly can. And I'm, again, working with the AG to that extent. What I will say at a high level is the AG has noted that it should not be members of the team itself collating information regarding conflicts. It should be a relationship between the commissioners and the Attorney General's office. So more to come on that in the coming days.
Very good. Are there further questions? Comments? Director Apollo, then are you looking for confirmation of
Mr. Chairman,
RFQ? Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, that would be correct. I think the recommendation here is to approve the qualified vendors for RFQ4, which would allow the team to notify them and get the ball rolling on invites to the RFP. And again, if any teams were to appeal their verdict, we can certainly handle that as well.
So thank you very much for that. I'd entertain a motion if one is appropriate.
So
I would.
So who did I catch? Was that
that was
Christie.
Auditor Racinas and David Pope kind of simultaneously, I believe. So I will second and let Auditor Racinas have the motion if she still wants it.
Sure, and just to be clear, we're moving the director's recommendation.
And that's what I understood as my second.
very good? Any discussion? This is Anthony, one piece of discussion. This will also be posted. So if there are people who did not meet the qualifications that want to request a review, they can go find this information. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, I do believe this information is already on our website.
Okay.
And if not, we could be there before this meeting wraps. And then again, we do, as part of our procurement rules, are required to reach out to all vendors who submitted anything and let them know what the determination was. So if they qualified, we let them know that they're a qualified vendor, and we send them the links to a kind of a gated RFP portal and give them instructions how to utilize that. If we found them to not be qualified for whatever reason, we do let them know why, and then again allow them to appeal that determination should they see the need to do that.
Thank you. You're already ahead of me, literally. So with that, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Nays?
Aye.
There. Commissioner Wallace, you came in as an aye. Was that meant to be in the aye column or the nay column?
Would be an aye.
Thank you. So with that, Director, that motion passes. Thank you for your work.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would certainly share the credit on that one with the team. There was a lot of hours put in over the holidays to get a lot of this done. So for the team, as well as our subject matter advisors, thank you to all for all the hours that came into this process. So, Mr. Chairman, we'll move on to our next memo, which is the RFP4 and RFP6 issuance memo. Again, the kind of goal at the end of this will be to approve both of these RFPs. So to quickly recap from our last discussion, when we had our meeting on the 19th, because we had punted on the RFQ4 qualifications, we kind of let RFP 4 fall in line with that and extended the timeline to get that in tip-top shape. And then for RFP 6, during the discussion, there was a number of comments on how we should be phrasing things to make sure that the way we were defining or, again, phrasing things was in line with, let's say, guidance from the AICPA or PCAOB, perhaps in guidance with some of the language we see in current attestation around stablecoins. So we pulled that one off the table to refresh it and then have spent the time putting that language back in. So again, we have now completed, revised, and I believe final drafts of RFP 4 and RFP 6. RFP 6, again, being for financial audit attestation. And I guess one nuance here is, so RFP 4, should that go live following today's discussion, following a vote by the commission, we would again invite the qualified vendors we just talked about to that RFP. For RFP 6, we already know who those vendors are, and they've already been onboarded through the process. And thanks to Steph for the help on that. But that's just a quick note about access. One thing that is worth going through here is the roadmap or the timeline. Again, because we put a little bit of extra space in between the bulk of RFPs, the other 5, and these final 2. We have punted out the timeline a bit, but we will look to actually try to hybridize things towards the end. So we will send out RFQ notifications, and so again, for who's qualified or not, and invite those who are qualified to the info center. That will happen today. And again, Steph's already got the whole format set up. So that is just dragging and dropping email addresses into an email and hitting the button. We open up the vendor submission and Q&A period. So again, Q&A is the facilitation of answering questions that the qualified vendors may have about the RFP process or the substance of the RFP itself. The goal here is to make sure that there is information parity amongst all parties. So when questions come in, we anonymize the question, we anonymize the response to the question, and then we post that on our either the RFQ site or the RFP site, based on which side it came in on, to make sure everyone's got the information. We remind people intermittently that the information is there. And we also reach out directly to the proposer of the question to let them know that it's answered as well. We have another deadline on January 14th, which are kind of bilateral. So from the qualified vendors, on the 14th is their last day to submit any questions. And then we go into kind of commission's silent period. And then they also have a deadline then to acknowledge the MOU. Again, as a quick reminder, as part of our RFP process, we did put together a memorandum of understanding. It is not a legally binding document. However, we did want to make sure that the teams working on putting these proposals together were aware of the procurement rules we have in place, were aware of the Wyoming Public Records Act and how that impacts confidentiality, or sometimes perhaps the lack thereof, and a version of a template Wyoming state contract, because the expectation is all of our contracts will be signed on Wyoming state letterhead. So we have that as a January 4th deadline. As a quick note, I can confirm that all of the qualified vendors that have been put into the process so far all signed off on the MOU by the deadline. And again, I appreciate the follow-up from the team on that. And then from the team's side, we will evaluate the evaluation criteria on January 14th. Again, we have a kind of a high-level definition in Appendix D of the RFPs about what we expect. What we look to provide through the evaluation criteria is actually the mathematical score breakdown. And that was sent for the other 5 RFPs that has been distributed to the qualified vendors. And that looks at everything from oral presentations to the substance of the proposal to the structure of the team and all of that good stuff. So we've got all of those built out as well. And then we'll submit those to the qualified vendors for RFP 4 and RFP 6 on the 14th or by the 14th. And then we've got another deadline on January 17th to make sure that any questions that came to the commission pertaining to RFP 4 or RFP 6 are answered by the 17th. For clarity, the existing questions we have now on RFPs 1, 2, 3, 5, and 7. I think we got just under 100 questions all said and done. We've answered, I think, about a third of them already, if not more. And the expectation is those will be all answered by January 6th. So we're moving on that as well. The vendor submission deadline for RFPs 4 and 6 will be February 7th. That is a week out from when all the other RFPs are due. I understand that we truncated a little bit and switched the timeline down a little bit, but again, we don't want to create too much of a disparity between those two, as we want to maximize overlap. Reason being, if firms want to form consortia, then they need time to kind of find each other. If you have a process that's too staggered, I worry that perhaps it would not happen. So there will be significant overlap as the other RFPs are due on January 30th. We're talking about only a week, even though we had, I think, 2 weeks of spread for pushing this process out for RFQ4. We would look to have oral presentations and interviews made by qualified vendors to the commission throughout the month of February. We look to wind that down on the 27th and have the evaluation committee put its thoughts and feedback, and these are scored rubrics at this point. Those will be put together and presented to the commission on February 27th with potential award notifications going out the next day and looking to engage quickly thereafter. So any questions on the timeline? Mr. Chairman, I'm not seeing any hands.
I don't see any hands either. So last call.
I guess one thing, Anthony, if somebody asked me when we're going to mint our first coin, what's your answer?
Through the chair, Commissioner Meyer, we've talked about a fairly aggressive schedule to get this thing out the door. And I think we're sticking to it. If we're engaging firms in early March, because we are looking to bring on teams that already have built technology and structures that already exist, I see no reason why we should not have a Wyoming stable token on, at a minimum, a blockchain testnet by the end of March. That should be functionally deploying code and then just testing it and distributing it. For the fully reserved Wyoming stable tokens, that's going to require some time working with the different reserves management parties to structure all of that. But again, I think we really are pushing and sticking to getting this out the door in a fully reserved manner that is functionally live for utilization by end of Q2 of this year.
Okay, thank you.
And I, just for my own information, we are issuing a token, not minting a coin. Is that correct?
Yeah, right.
Mr. Chairman, I would agree with that vernacular.
Okay, thank you. If there is nothing more, Director, are you looking for approval of?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I think the next step would be to approve RFPs 4 and 6. They were circulated by the team. I'm more than happy to go through them at a kind of 10,000 foot level if you'd like, but if the commission feels comfortable with them, again, recognizing that that several commissioners were part of the subcommittees and working groups that were on top of these, happy to move forward at the way that works best for yourself and the group.
So what's the pleasure of the commission?
I would move approval of RFP proposals 4 and 6.
Been moved by Commissioner Meyer. Is there support for Commissioner Meyer's motion?
I will second that.
It's been seconded by Commissioner Pope. Is there any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Nays? Very good, Director. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the team and again, all of the members of the working groups that have helped us push this forward. You know, there's been a lot of work done in a fine amount of time, and I'm proud of it. And I think the team is proud of it and happy to move forward in that capacity. The last thing I'll say for the purposes of this call is that we will not have another lengthier meeting in the month of January. We'll have another shorter special meeting on February 7th, which will be to look at the proposals that are in at that time, which should be functionally all of them at that point. At that time, we would look to have a determination of which firms that the commission would like to interview formally for proposals. Perhaps it's all of them, or perhaps we, take a portion of them and put them into the kind of oral presentation funnel and then keep moving from there. And then the next lengthy monthly meeting of the commission will be February 27th. And again, that reflects the ongoing proposal process as much as that reflects the legislative session that will be starting on January 14th. So I'm happy to field any other questions from my end, but for the purposes of today's discussion, we wanted to approve the RFQ, the qualified vendors. We wanted to approve the 2 RFPs, and that has been accomplished.
Are there any questions? Any questions? Hearing none. Director, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I realized you were looking for questions, not questions on a motion. Apologies. Forgot my decorum for a moment.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I was good to, only questions. So, if there are none, is there anything else to come before the commission today? Director, I don't believe there is. In which case I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Been
Second.
moved by the treasurer, seconded by the auditor.
Yep.
All right, very good. You guys are solid on this. Thank you. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 I think we are adjourned. Thank you very much. And again, Happy New Year to all.
Thank you.
you.